Hello. In this episode, I have Arne Peters with me, and this is a guy who knows everything about making people fast on the flat roads on a cycle. Arne, welcome.
Thanks, Casper. Good to be here.
For those who don't know anything about you or don't know who you are, maybe you can start off by telling something about yourself and your journey.
Yeah. So I've been a cyclist, a pretty okay cyclist, I would say, like semi-professional level. Never got to the top of the sport, but really interested in all the equipment and all the data surrounding cycling as well. So after I quit racing professionally, I started building my own bike brand and developing my own frame. Also a bit of coaching. So yeah, heavily involved in everything cycling. And I could say that I made my hobby my work as well. So yeah,
That's
pretty
good
cool.
to hear. So try to take me back to when you were racing like professionally. What did you think in that time made a person fast on the flat roads?
Yeah. So in that time, racing in a peloton is very different compared to doing a time trial, for example, or training on your own. So back then I was really focused on tactics in the race, team tactics. Those were really important. I was kind of the team captain of the team, and always thinking about what everyone's role in the race should be, how to make the best decisions at what moment. But when I stopped racing, I started thinking more about what are the physics of cycling, because I wanted to develop a frame that was as fast as possible on flat roads. So I had to start thinking a bit differently about the rider bike interaction. And then that's when I, of course, ended up with studying aerodynamics, because that's very important on the bike. I would say I already knew during my racing career that it was important, but it was never that big of a focus that I actually did the testing. But yeah, afterwards, it seems very obvious that that would have helped me in my career. So it's a bit of a regret as well.
Yeah, so you found out about this maybe a little too late in terms of how much your own position on a bike actually limiting your speed on the roads, especially when you're in a breakaway or whatever it can be.
Right. Yeah. So there are many situations in the race where aerodynamics are very important, and it's especially when you hit the front, hit the wind. That's where it matters a lot.
Yeah, makes sense. So what do you think is wrong with the conventional setup of the bikes in that time, but also maybe today compared to what you try to work more towards now?
Yeah, I think most bikes are set up more all round. So you want to do a bit of climbing, a bit of riding on flat roads. It should be kind of aero, but also comfortable. And it makes sense, if you're doing a lot of different races, you don't want to constantly change your bike setup. But there are people that just want to be as fast as possible, and they live in a flat area. And in that case, it doesn't really make sense to make it an all-round option. So I would say that road bikes are in general not designed to suit the rider in the fastest position, which is what I started testing. Yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Was there like a specific ride, race, or test where you thought, wait, this shouldn't be faster, but this actually is?
Yeah, it was kind of funny when I was designing the frame. I thought, what would be a good challenge to push myself to learn as much as possible about going fast on flat roads. So I went for a 1 hour max effort, or a 1 hour, I would say like an hour record on the road. So getting every bit of position on the bike, every bit of equipment optimized to go as fast as possible, without using a disc wheel, and but more of a conventional road setup. so when I was testing for that, I already found, okay, when I move my stack height much higher, it actually makes it possible for my body to be in a more aerodynamic position. So with my shoulders shrugged way more, head much lower, much more in line with my upper body. So that was already a finding. Okay, I moved my handlebars quite a bit higher, but I'm still going faster, and just like as recorded in an aero test. But after that, I got the aero data. Okay, let's go with the lowest CDA option and see how long can I maintain that position. But when I did a few test laps of the circuit that I chose, which was just very low traffic with easy corners, still I found that after like 5 or 10 minutes, it was almost impossible to hold that position. Like triceps, shoulders, everything starts hurting a lot. So, and also recorded like what kind of power am I doing, and what is the RPE, or the rate of perceived exertion, with that power. And so yeah, I used an adjustable stem to be able to quickly raise and drop my handlebars, and I raised it even higher to the point I thought, okay, this is getting kind of ridiculous, but let's try. And it just improved my power that much, and also my comfort, that overall it was faster. Afterwards I did the testing for CDA as well, and obviously my CDA was a bit lower, but overall I was just way faster, and it was more sustainable because I wanted to do it for an hour, so it should also be sustainable, the position. So that was kind of a aha moment, like that I didn't expect my bars to be needed to be that high.
And that's also like the big question I think we will getting around today, is that I think most people think that is lower actually faster. And normally you see that people that try to be more aerodynamic try also to go lower and lower. But it's also like what you're talking about here. I think it's really important to see how is the comfort, how is the power you can push in the different positions. So why do you actually still think that cyclists thinks that lower automatically means faster in a position on a bike?
Yeah, I think things that are measurable are often favored in these situations. And of course, the power on the bike is measurable as well. But for example, if you're doing aero testing, it's natural to go with the lowest CDA possible. To go test the difference in your power output in like both positions, that's quite a bit harder. So the natural choice would be to just go with the lowest CDA option and see if you can sustain it. Now, of course, there are riders, TT specialists that also consider their power. And if you do a race with a suboptimal position and you're cramping all over the place, you quickly find out, okay, this is not an option. But yeah, I think that the first choice for people is to go with low CDA. It's the same with weight loss. People think, okay, for climbing, a lower weight is better, and it's really easy to step on the scale, see the number drop, and thinking, okay, I'm doing a good thing. But I think recently there's also been more voices saying that you don't necessarily need to be the lightest possible, but like the optimal balance between power and weight and watts per kilogram, of course. But yeah, it's a quite hard optimization to make.
Yeah, we saw this in Tour de France with Arne Peters, like suddenly a sprinter becoming a climber. It was a pretty crazy way to win a green jersey.
Yeah.
So what is actually normally happening to the aerodynamics when you raise your handlebars? Because of course you get into a position where you are less aerodynamic, but what tends to happen when you get into this for people that don't know so much about aerodynamics?
So everything staying equal in terms of your arm and head position, you increase your frontal area, because CDA or aero drag is made up of two components, and it's the area and a coefficient of drag. A coefficient of drag is like a property of a shape. So your body in the same position has a certain CD value. And you can change it, for example, with clothing, and the texture of the clothing can change your CD value. But a big component of CDA is the area, the frontal area. And just raising your handlebars, it increases your frontal area. So in almost every case, that increases your CDA or aero drag. A second order effect of raising handlebars is that it allows your head and shoulders to be in a different position. So it's really important to consider that as well. So that's different for everyone. Some people are really flexible. They can get into a really aerodynamic shape with their body with lower handlebars. And for some people, it's just unsustainable.
Yeah, because it also has to be comfortable. If you have to ride 60 minutes, but can only hold it for 30 minutes, overall, it would definitely be worse if you have to get up basically in the wind anyway. So in your opinion, what is the perfect aero position actually look like? We touched a little bit about the handlebars and stuff like that. Now we also talk about the head and struggling the upper body and stuff like that with the shoulders. So if you have to put like a description to the perfect aero position, what would it look like?
Yeah, good one. My hypothesis when I went testing on the road bike was, okay, I wanted to mimic a TT bike position, because you want as little like holes in your shape as possible. You want your shape as smooth as possible, and of course you want the lowest frontal area as possible. With those two components, that's also where TT bikes or TT positions are built up of. So that's one thing that I mimicked. And in terms of your things you can think of in terms of position, is you want your shoulders as close together as possible, and you can do that by retracting your shoulder blades and then shrugging your shoulders like towards the back of your head or towards your ears, and that moves your shoulders closer to your head and your helmet, and that makes the entire shape of your body much more smooth. And that's also what you see in time trialists. And now recently we've also seen the much bigger helmets, which is also counterintuitive, but that's just to fill up those gaps that are otherwise created with the head and the shoulders. It's a much more or less of a smooth shape, but when you make the shape smoother, even though it looks like a bigger helmet, it's still faster.
Yeah, because the wind is directing over the body instead of into the shoulders and then around it, basically. Yeah, it makes really good sense. So in terms of the elbows and forearms, that is something people often tend to look quite a lot on when getting on the bike to get a really good position. How important is this? Because if you have to use a lot of power in terms of getting into the position in general, it can be really hard, as you mentioned, on the shoulders, but also the triceps to keep it. And then you have to like reset for 5 minutes and then get back to it. Is this the idea with higher handlebars, that it should be more like maintainable for the elbows and forearms to get into a good position, or what is the reason?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it takes load or away from your hands and shoulders. So that makes it easier to hold. And it also helps with when you shrug your shoulders, and retract your shoulder blades. Effectively, you're moving your hands and your elbows closer to your chest. And if you are like horizontally on the bike and you move your elbows closer to your chest, your handlebars have to be raised. Otherwise, you have to drop your upper body, which like creates a smaller hip angle again. And with a smaller hip angle, it's very good, there's a good relationship between a smaller hip angle and lower power. If you, for most people, that is the case. So, of course, if you're Remco Evenepoel, a really talented TT rider, you can see him riding with quite a closed hip angle. And if you can maintain power with that position, it's probably faster, but most of us mere mortals cannot do that.
Yeah, people can just try to do like a back squat, but then bend over in like 45 degrees or something like that to see if they can maintain the same power. It makes really good sense. In terms of an average cyclist, or even those who tend to try to be better over time and maybe go pro or whatever, do you think most of them is actually making themselves slower by trying to be looking more aerodynamic because they think it's the lowest position possible, that is the best one?
Yeah, I think especially guys that go for breakaways, for example, or if they do long pulls in the wind, it's really important to be able to stay in a narrow position. And it's actually funny if you ask racers, like, how long would you be able to keep that position? If they, for example, they say, okay, I can get really aero, and I get videos on Instagram, for example, saying people say, does this look aero? And I say, yeah, it's aero, but can you sustain it? And I think it's a funny thing that not many like pro cyclists even try to keep that position for a long time. And if you see a guy doing a breakaway, they quickly start to get sloppy with their position. And that's something that can be avoided by just changing the bike fit. Now, I must say that if you're a sprinter, for example, or you have a different role in the team, it might not make sense to change your bike fit to accommodate like a solo riding position. So it's really dependent on the goal of the rider as well. When I see pro riders, and I still talk to some guys, I was in a team with other pro cyclists, of course. And you ask them, how much do you actually train in an aero position? How much do you try to maintain that aero position? And how long have you ever tried it in the past? And it's actually much shorter than you would think. Even especially when you know the importance of the position for aerodynamics. So I think that's really interesting that it's still underestimated, I would say.
How can it then be that more of these guys don't think more about it? Do you think it's because they don't know it, or they get the wrong training, or they just don't care?
Yeah, it's interesting to me as well. If you ask a time trialist, they are completely obsessed with everything aerodynamics. But sometimes the same guy that's really obsessed about aerodynamics on the time trial bike, they care way less on a road bike. So yeah, tell me, I don't know what is going on here.
Fair enough. How much of modern bike fitting is based on science, do you think, and how much is simply based on tradition because it's what you have been tending to do in the previous years?
I think most bike fitters use pretty little, or quite a small amount of science, to be honest. And if you define science as like doing trial and error, which I think is a big part of doing science, you have an hypothesis, you test it, and you check the results. Of course, bike fitters, they try things with riders that have a problem, for example. They try things and see what is the result. So they, especially more experienced bike fitters, they have a lot of data with a lot of riders, and they have found solutions in the past, and they get like a pattern recognition. So in that case, solving comfort problems, I would completely trust a bike fitter or an experienced bike fitter with that. Now, in terms of going as fast as possible, I think for most bike fitters, there's quite not enough feedback loop to see, okay, these are the changes that I made to the position of the rider. Now, how does it actually improve their speed on the bike? And that is the two parts are important for that. That is the power output of the rider and the CDA or aero drag of the position. And you have to get both sides of the data to be able to make a better decision in the future. And I think very few bike fitters get all that data.
Makes sense. If I gave you the average amateur cyclist tomorrow and told you have to make them fast on the flat roads, what would the first thing you will be doing with this person? Where would you start?
I would start with a test, a simple test, and I think changing the stem to an adjustable stem, so you can quickly change handlebar positions, and do a quick test just by giving cues about how to get aero with their position, and then see if they can hold it. That would be my first step. Just because the aerodynamics is such a big part of the resistance that you experience on the bike, and then the body position being almost all the aero drag on the bike. So that's the big obvious thing I would do first.
Cool. And what is normally the 3 biggest mistakes you see cyclists making when trying to become faster?
I think a big one is focusing on things that are not moving the needle enough, focusing on a specific interval session, focusing on getting a specific brand of wheels, for example. And of course, all of these things matter, but sometimes they ignore the big obvious thing. And sometimes it's just something unfamiliar, something not sexy maybe, but something that has real impact.
Then if you had like 1,000 euros or 2,000 euros to make a cyclist faster, or even if it was yourself, where would you tend to spend that first if you're seeing a person that is an average cyclist?
Yeah. So after you've done some testing, maybe get a track test, so you can rent a velodrome for less than 1,000 euros, I think. That's a good step. So establishing a good position. After that, improve the helmets maybe, and improve the suit and socks / overshoes, clothing. So that is a big optimization, and it really pays to get the fastest clothing possible. I've seen in my own testing a difference between 2 time trial suits of like 15 watts, so at 40 kilometers an hour. So that's quite significant just by already comparing 2 fast suits. And if you're wearing something that's not even aero, there's even bigger savings to be made.
Yeah, makes sense. Then what is the biggest like free speed thing you can find on most cyclists that they're leaving on the table?
I'm repeating myself here, but the free speed is the position on the bike, of course, and training that, being mindful of it, going out on an interval session and forcing yourself to adopt that position for the entire interval, for example. Just these things. I think 80% of the cyclists are focused on, okay, can I push the power in an interval? But what's way more important is how fast are you going? And the position part of it, the aerodynamics part of it, is just not trained enough. And it's free, it's you're out training, you're already spending your time trying to get faster. Why not also train the position?
Yeah, makes sense. Makes really good sense. How much in your philosophy does this aerodynamic part and the position being important for someone like riding maybe only 25 kilometers an hour? Of course, aerodynamics means more the faster you're riding, but is there like a sweet spot where it starts to make more sense, like 20 kilometers an hour, 25, or where does this normally start?
Yeah, it's like an exponential curve, and the faster you go, it exponentially gets more important. But I think most cyclists, when, for example, your FTP is above 200 watts, you on a flat road with pretty standard equipment, you will quickly approach over 25 kilometers an hour. I think that's reasonable for most cyclists. And in that case, aerodynamics already make quite a big difference, and it's not maybe 80% of your drag. I looked up a table yesterday, and it was like a CDA of 0.32, which is very average for a road bike. And if you're traveling at 25 kilometers an hour, it's around 60 to 70% of your drag comes from aero drag. So that's already more than 50%. So yeah, like if it's 60 or 70%, like just getting more aero, you can imagine that it makes quite a big difference already.
So if a person is training quite a lot, would you then focus more on the position tomorrow instead of working with the FTP? If it's a person that have been riding a couple of years or even is new into the game, is the position something that should come before the FTP and trying to increase that?
Yeah, it's a good point that for every cyclist there's a different thing that is the low hanging fruit. And what like you said, a cyclist that has already done a lot of training, they may be close to their theoretical max FTP, and you'll never get there, but at some point you're maybe 10% away, and it's very hard to get that few extra percent just by training more or training differently, nutrition. At that point, if you've not done or spent the time or money investing in aerodynamics, I mean, it's the big obvious thing at that point. Now there are riders that have done all the aerodynamic optimizations, but just can't stick to a training schedule. So, and then it's the other way around, of course.
Yeah, makes sense. So if a cyclist is riding a lot alone and training really much on their own as well, how is the easiest way to be focused on the position? What should they be looking at when riding alone in terms of the position? Because you talked about different position in terms of the shoulders, the elbows, the head, the upper body in terms of shrugging as well. So that is quite a lot of things. So do you have some sort of scheme where, okay, this is the most important thing, and then a couple of things that we could give some of the riders maybe listening that could be helping them to get faster tomorrow if they're thinking about it riding alone?
Yeah, just some mental cues, I think you mean. And the thing I would start with is lowering your elbows, so getting your forearms horizontal to the ground. That is crucial. It drops your entire upper body, lowers your frontal area. After that, I would say shrugging the shoulders, and I would do that before your head position, because when you're out on the open road training, you need to look ahead every now and then. And if you can make the choice between looking ahead all the way and never looking in front of you, so the second option, that's not really possible on the open road. So I would go with shrugging your shoulders, being really diligent with that, and I find that your head position follows with shrugging your shoulders as well, because it's like at some point it gets one motion. You shrug your shoulders and you tug your head close to your chest, or you get it lower, and it gets one motion. But yeah, so that's the order I would choose. forearms, shoulders shrug, then head position.
Makes really good sense. So maybe diving into the bike industry in general, what do you think is the reason behind more bigger bike brands might not work with higher stack heights for the aero bikes in general?
That's a hard question for me because I'm not really sure. I don't have discussions with other bike brands. Like they don't tell me why they do the things that they do. I think a big driver is they follow just consumer behavior. They build the bikes that consumers want, and consumers choose the bikes that the pro wants, and the pros choose the bike that they think is fastest, or just what they see other people win on. So I think in general humans tend to look at each other a lot instead of look at what the data says, what the physics say. Every now and then there's a change of thinking, and we've seen jumps in, for example, rim brake, disc brake changes. Now almost everyone is disc brake fan, but at some point it was the other way around. So I think the stack height could be one of the bigger changes in the next few years. We've seen the shift already in time trial positions. When you talk to older cyclists, they remember the time when time trial bikes had these really small front wheels, these really, really low stack heights to get as low to the ground as possible. But nowadays, you see pretty crazy stack heights on time trial bikes. And I think it's only a matter of time that people get the realization that it could also help on a road bike.
Do you think we in 5 years will look back to now and say, and maybe think that slam stems was really ridiculous?
Yeah, I think many people already do, right? That I think a GCN, for example, is a good example of a channel that shows what people are interested in, and they are not fans of slam stem anymore. So I think that the general perception of a slam stem is already it's already changed in people's minds for sure.
Yeah, makes sense. I think I will try to throw some questions at you and then try to answer them as short as possible. The first one is, lower is always faster.
No.
Most cyclists should ride 30 or 32 millimeters tires.
Yeah.
Why do you think so?
Just because there is a comfort benefit on rough roads. You can drop your tire pressure without sacrificing a lot of speed. Just for comfort. I think for speed, going a little bit narrower is still faster. But the most important thing is that it matched width. So nowadays you can get pretty wide wheels that match the 30 millimeter tires very well. And you have a very fast setup that is almost as fast as a narrower option.
Makes sense. You should spend money on a bike fit before buying expensive wheels.
For sure, yes.
The average cyclist doesn't need an aero bike.
They might not need it, but I think most cyclists agree that it's cool, especially when you're on flat roads, and it looks like the race car, and I think people appreciate the aesthetics as well. You don't really need it because it's a small part of the drag. Your frame is not like the biggest influence on your speed, but just because it's cool.
Most cyclists have no idea if they are aerodynamic or not.
Yeah, true. I mean, most people have never seen their CDA number.
That's correct. I guess if you ask like 100 people, 99 of them haven't heard of it.
Yeah, right. And it's understandable. It's hard to measure.
Yeah, exactly. What is the fastest tire width on a road bike?
It depends, which is a boring reply, I know. But yeah, there are many factors to to what is the fastest tire width. First you start with the road surface. You start with like what wheel setup do you have? What are the conditions you ride in? But I would say it's a bit narrower than what most people think nowadays. You don't really need a 30 millimeter tire to get fast, but I would still recommend it for most cyclists because you can get it you can make it much more comfortable.
What is the most overrated upgrade in terms of aerodynamics?
Interesting. I think integrated handlebars are up there. I think they do very little, and it's more of an aesthetic thing. And I think they look good, but they're not the biggest aero upgrade.
But there's also like the mentality and the fashion about it.
Right.
What is the most underrated upgrade in terms of aerodynamics?
Yeah, hard one. So I think an adjustable stem is underrated.
Yeah, till the point where you know where you're supposed to be, then you should get like
right
handlebars based on that, right?
Right. So as a tool of finding a better position, it's great. You don't really need it, of course, when you already got a established position. But I don't see many people using it as a tool, and it's a great way to quickly change positions.
Yeah, makes sense. What is the most misunderstood aerodynamic concept, in your opinion?
Misunderstood concept. I think like the boundary layer. People talk about it, and it's a quite a difficult thing to understand. Like how do you trip the airflow, things like that. And we have some concept of it, but it's very hard to visualize, like what actually happens, and how can it be that a rough piece of clothing is actually faster than a smooth piece of clothing. It's counterintuitive, but yeah, maybe many people know why this. I'm not sure.
And the last question, which I guess would benefit the listeners, if you could give one advice to a cyclist tomorrow, and this person should do it to become faster, what would it be?
Start testing. Start changing things in your position and see how it affects your speed. You don't need the fancy equipment. You don't need the air pressure sensors, although they can help. You can do a lot of testing if you have a power meter, or even without a power meter, just by swapping things on your bike, changing positions, and then seeing how does it feel, how does it affect your speed.
Makes really good sense. Arne, thank you so much for joining this episode.
Thanks for having me, Casper. It was a great talk.